Okay, in this clip, I'll give a sort of a general summary of what skepticism is, what its goals are, and then how philosophers who are not skeptics try to reply or respond to the skeptical challenges, right? Most people believe that we know things, and if we know things, then what we know is true, number one, and we can show why it's true. We can justify our claim to knowledge with providing evidence or some form of a demonstration or proof. The skeptic, just in general, claims that knowledge, if it requires the elimination of the possibility of error, is something we cannot possess. And we cannot know things, according to the skeptic, because regardless of how good our evidence is, there's some possible scenario whereby, even given our evidence, we're wrong. So you can't have evidence that's so good that it eliminates the possibility of error. So they'll claim that that's not something that we can achieve. So the skeptic is basically denying that we know things if knowledge requires the elimination of the possibility of error. So how do they go about defending that view? Well, typically they are sort of counterpunchers. When someone claims to know something, or if a philosopher has developed some theory about what knowledge is, where the description of knowledge includes some sort of criterion or criteria, a set of conditions. So, some subject knows X if they meet all of the following conditions. Well, the skeptic will try to think of scenarios where someone can tick all those boxes. They can meet that definition of knowledge. However, they would not know what they claim to know because of something that they're unaware of, or something like that, some possibility that they didn't rule out. And the skeptic does that by producing hypotheses. Skeptical hypotheses are mere possibilities. They're ways in which we could be wrong. And the skeptic is not saying that these skeptical hypotheses are true. They're not saying that we are wrong. What they're saying is that we can't prove that we're not wrong. We can't eliminate all of the ways in which we could be wrong. So skeptical hypotheses are produced to challenge claims to know things. And skeptical hypotheses can be very targeted, very specific kinds of arguments. For instance, if someone says, I know that certain objects exist because I see them, well, a skeptic may just come up with some skeptical hypothesis that challenges vision, and vision only. Optical illusions, hallucinations, things like that. Is it possible that on any given occasion that when we see something, that something isn't there? Does our perceptual equipment, our minds working with our perceptual equipment, produce sensory data or sensory images that do not reflect reality? Well, the short answer is, well, yeah, that does happen. So that's a very specific kind of claim, but they can also produce global skeptical hypotheses, where one skeptical hypothesis challenges any kind of knowledge claim you might make, namely, a famous case is Descartes' evil deity or demon, where we're supposed to imagine the possibility of an all-knowing, all-powerful, but malevolent being that exists. Is it possible that such a being exists? Well, the skeptic says, well, it's possible, yeah. Well, is it possible that such a being would try to manipulate me on a given occasion into believing something that's actually false? Well, that's possible, yeah. Theoretically possible. It's possible in the sense that imagining that doesn't involve a contradiction. Something that's impossible is like drawing a round square. That's impossible. You can't do that. The skeptic is saying that the possibility of an evil demon isn't like a round square. It doesn't lead to some contradiction. There actually could be such a thing, and if there were such a being, it's possible that they might, get a kick out of making us believe things that are false. So the hypothesis basically challenges us to prove that there is no such being. In other words, prove that you're not being manipulated by such a being. And of course, it's a pretty tough challenge, and it covers not only your visual experiences, but other kinds of things we believe, like 2 + 2 = 4, things like that. In other words, we'd be wrong about math if such a being were manipulating us, right? So that's what skeptics do. And again, it's worth repeating that the skeptic is not telling us that there is such an evil deity. They realize that this is a mere logical possibility, but they don't really need to try to convince us that such a being exists. The burden of proof, they claim, is on us to prove that such a being does not exist. And they think that whatever argument we produce is not going to work because the argument itself may have been a product of being manipulated by this malevolent demon or deity. Now, the responses to the skeptic come in different flavors. There's some philosophers, empiricists, who claim that there's something about sensory experience or our perceptual experiences, the character and content of those experiences, that shows us that we're not being duped, or that we're not wrong all the time. Rationalists argue that, well, no, we can just, using our reason and intellect and logic, we can think our way out of this problem. We can prove, that we're not being duped by an evil deity, and these other skeptical hypotheses are also not something to worry about, or that we can show that they're not true. So you get different approaches and to meet the skeptic on their own terms. Another approach is to not meet the skeptic on their own terms, and that is to just argue that, well, look, I don't need to be concerned with mere possibilities. The possibility of an evil demon, okay, that's logically possible, but unless and until you give me a reason to believe that that's a real worry, I'm not going to take it seriously. So they shift the burden of proof to the skeptic, and they would say the skeptic actually owes us something. The skeptic owes us an argument to establish that these are genuine worries, evil demons and other kinds of far-fetched logical possibilities. It's not enough to say that, in other words, that something is merely logically possible that would cause me to be wrong. You have to give me a real reason to believe that possibility of error is a legitimate one that I should be concerned with. So that strategy is just turning the table on the skeptic and saying to the skeptic, well, look, you actually have to prove something. I don't, right? So that's just a little bit about skepticism and what they're trying to do, and then a little bit about possible responses.